In this lesson we're going to change tack a little bit. We have so far looked at a bunch of lessons where we've tried to figure out a formula or a feature of Excel. In a couple of instances we have combined 2 or 3 of those things together to solve a problem. What I consider the real end point for Excel is being able to do projects. By a project I mean a file that you can use over time. You can add new data to, such as a new day's data or a new week's data, and the outputs that you get can cope with that and can produce a new report from that added information. A project also requires a little bit more thinking, and you often have to make it ready for someone else to also use. When it's for yourself, you can make it a little bit messy and you can have a few of your workings showing, but when it's a project that someone else might use, you tend to want to hide that away so that it looks nice and clean. Now, a dashboard is a term that you hear probably a little bit too much. What it really means is that you've got a bunch of information all presented into one page, and that's summary information from a whole lot of detail that's sitting somewhere else. So in your car, a dashboard shows you a few dials and a few numbers, whereas here what we're seeing is a table, a couple of graphs on the side, some highlighted information in the blue boxes, a table with some conditional formats attached to it, and some dynamic charts that you can interact with, in this case with a pivot table timeline tool, such as reducing it down to a shorter period of time. I'm sure you've got data sets of your own that are being added to all the time that you could create a dashboard concept for, such as fitness testing data, where you add a new record for an athlete every couple of months. What we have here is 13 months of my own Fitbit data. I've been using it for about 18 months now, and this is a snapshot of that beginning the 1st of the 1st last year. And if we double click on the margin, we can go down to the bottom of the data set and we can see that the data finishes at the end of January 2016. So we've got 13 months. I've deleted a few columns of data from the original export, so we've just got a relatively small data set to look at here. The first step that I want to take is to convert it to a table. And I want to name that table something. I'm going to call it TBL Fitbit. And so we now have that nice tight data set that we can add to easily, knowing that the layout and formulas and so on are going to copy down. Something I use extensively when I'm operating a project is a sheet called a control panel. So I'm going to add that in there. And I'm going to put a reference table in this control panel for us. It's called a date table. I want to create a list of weeks that we can use as a way to slice the data up. And I've got 2 column headings. I'll just expand them out so you can see. We've got week number and we've got Monday. If I just start with week number and I copy down to about week 100, let's say. Now, I haven't got that much data in my system, but there's potential that I might over time be adding to this. So I'm going to give myself room to grow here. 100 weeks of information. And now I know that the first day of data was the 1st of the 1st, 2015. So let's put that in. And let's see what day of the week that was. It's really easy to do that simply by changing the date format. So that was a Thursday. So if I want a list beginning with Monday, a little bit of trial and error will give me that. There we go. So the Monday was the 29th of December. So week 1's a bit of a short week. We've only got 5 out of the 7 days of data. To get all the subsequent Mondays is dead easy, because we know that there's 7 days in a week. You simply have to do +7. If I double click to send that down, we can see that it's populated all the Mondays through to 21st of November 2016. It actually makes sense to go a little bit further than that. so that it gives us a nice even 2 years worth of space. Now that we've got that in place, I'm going to convert to a table again. Let's just check that it's correctly guessed. It has, and let's call that TBL dates. So we've now got two tables. One is a reference table and one is our data table. Inserting a column after date, I'm going to insert the week. Now week 1, week 2, week 3 isn't very descriptive, so you might want to edit how you label those, but I'm going to use that for now because it makes the analysis nice and easy for us. Hopefully we can do this okay now. We're going to use the index function to look up today's date. In this case it's the 1st of the 1st, 2015. We want to find out what week that belongs to. So if we want to look up the date table and extract the week number, we do this by matching whatever's in the same row of the date column and we match it inside the Monday field. Now instead of an exact match, which is what we use most of the time, we want a less than approximate match. And so that's going to populate down the week that we're in. We can see that there's 4 days in week 1, but after that it should be 7 days. So our chart's going to look a little bit skewed in week 1, but that's okay as long as we remember that when we're doing our analysis. So we've now got a reasonable looking data set. Let's get started on creating a bit of a summary table. Now we could do that in a couple of different ways, but I want to use this as a learning exercise. So I'm going to skip back over to my control panel sheet. Now I'm particularly interested in 4 things on this table: total sleep, total steps, average weight, and average active minutes. I'll just expand that out. And so if they are my field headings, I can populate this table now with summary information using analysis formula. So let's first of all look at total steps. It's a pretty easy one really. It's a sum if. When we do a sum if, we need to have a range column and a criteria. So our range column is in the Fitbit table and we're looking at week. What week do we want to summarize? Week 1. And now that we've made that criteria, where is our data that we want to summarize? We're looking at steps. Close that off. Hit enter, and we've now populated out total steps for each week. Now if I scoop that out of the formula bar and paste it into total sleep, then a little bit of editing is all I need to be able to populate this column as well. Instead of steps, I'm looking at minutes asleep. Now minutes isn't as easy to understand as hours, so I'm going to divide by 60 and convert that to hours. Not a huge fan of this format, so I'm going to convert to a number with 1 decimal place. This one's a little bit different. Instead of sum, we want average. So average if, the same process as before. What's our criteria? Well, our criteria is week. Leveraging off column A. And we're looking at weight as our variable of interest. And so again, we've got formatting issues which we can change with a pretty simple click, selecting the whole column, changing to number, single decimal place. Now, because we're using average, we get errors if it can't find a denominator. So in this case, as we go down, we can see that there's nothing for week 105 and it's populating an error. That's a little bit ugly and potentially damaging if we do some larger summary formula. So I'm going to put if error at the beginning. And so now that's going to be a little bit more robust for us, and if I double click to go to the bottom, we can see blanks instead of errors, and that's quite helpful. And let's use average again for active minutes. Instead of wait, you can backspace that all the way back to nothing and choose minutes very active. Once again, fix the formats, and we're now ready to use some of that information for our analysis. Why don't we go ahead and make our first pivot table, clicking inside our table of Fitbit data, click Insert Pivot Table, put it on a new worksheet. Let's call that worksheet Pivots. And using the wizard, let's drag week into rows, steps and minutes very active into values. That's all I'm going to do in this pivot table. When you're working with pivot tables, if you've got a lot of data that it's searching through, it can create quite a big cache of information, so that when you're working in the pivot table doing some analysis, it's quick. The problem is that if you make another pivot table, it again creates a whole cache of data that it works with. If you copy and then paste an existing pivot table, it uses the same cache of data, and therefore it can make your spreadsheet faster. So I've just done that. I've copied and pasted, and what I would like to do is get rid of these two values and pull in two different ones. Now, weight's easy, I can pull that in, but I actually want hours of sleep, so I'm not happy with that. I want to go back to my data set, add a new field, put a formula in there, tidy it up with a decent format, and now I can go back to my pivot table, refresh, we'll get a new field available, and I can drag that in. So now what I'm looking for is, instead of sum of weight, I can change this one, average, right click again, number format, sum of hours of sleep is something that I want, so again it's just number format that I have to worry about. And because we did it in our summary table, I should do it here as well. Instead of sum of minutes very active across the week, we want to look at the average, which means we'll have to look at the number format as well. So we've now got two pivot tables. We can use these to make two pivot charts. So let's get started on that. On the Analyze tab, click on Pivot Chart. We want line charts because it's time series data. I want to use markers in this case, and I can cut this and paste it on a new sheet, and that'll be a sheet that we'll call Dashboard. And I can go online and I can find a little Fitbit logo. And I can also use a fancy font to create a heading. Completely unnecessary, but it certainly makes things look a little bit nicer. Let's do some work on this pivot chart. By right-clicking on a series and choosing Change Series Chart Type, it's easy for us to plot one of these two on a secondary axis. I'm going to do minutes very active on the secondary axis. One of the things I don't like about pivot tables is these field buttons, so I'm going to move all the field buttons away or hide them. Before I do the second chart, I want to make sure that my timeline feature is going to work. So going back to my pivot table, on the Analyze tab, click Insert Timeline. Timelines work with dates, so we choose that field and it's the only one available. Cut it out, paste it on my dashboard, make it a bit bigger, and see if I can get it to look the way I want it. There we go. So it's providing us the ability to interact with our data quickly now, and if I change it a bit, my charts change. So that's working great. I'm pretty happy with that. I want to get a second chart on here, so I'm just going to make that a little bit smaller. You end up doing a lot of this kind of fiddling around towards the end. Inside my second pivot table, Analyze tab, Pivot Chart. Again, I think a line chart is the key for this data. Clicking OK, cutting it out, pasting it on the dashboard, and repeating the steps that we did for the other chart. Choosing a series, right-clicking, change series chart type, and it doesn't matter which one we put where. I'm going to put the sleep on the secondary axis. Let me just see if it's interacting with this timeline. So the bottom chart isn't interacting with it, so let's right click on the timeline and look at report connections. We can see that the second one hasn't been ticked, so when we tick it, it's now connected. So we can go ahead and format these charts a little bit better now, starting with the removal of these field buttons. I want to skip across now and add a field to the data set that will allow me to do a bit of analysis by day of the week. And so if I go to my original data set, we can see we've got a date field, but there's no indication as to whether that is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or so on. So I'm going to find that out. Put a new field in the right hand column of the table. If I want to find out the day of the week, I can use a function to do that. I'm going to go to the control panel page and set up a little helper table to get me through this problem. By typing days of the week and then Monday, I can drag down to Sunday. Now back on my data set where I've got a column called day, I can write a formula. That formula is called weekday. If I click on the first of the first, I then get a bunch of options. Different parts of the world use different systems, and some people want to do it a certain way, so there's plenty of options. I want to have it where Monday is a 1. I can now use that index day number to find out how many steps I did on a particular day of the week and how many hours of sleep I got on a particular day of the week, just to see if there's any trends. So I can find that out on the control panel page. Just by writing an analysis formula. We want to use average if, just a single criteria. We want to find out if the day, I'm just going to hard write that in at the moment, which is a 1. And we're looking to find out what the average steps were. And if I have those numbers down the side, instead of hard coding one in there, I can simply reference that. Double click, drag that down.
Copy that across. And replace steps with hours of sleep. I can now create two charts from this data set. First one is steps, and if I do a simple copy of that, all I have to do is drag across the fields and the sleep will update. Holding down the control key, I can select them both together, cut them out, and put them on my dashboard. They're a bit too big at the moment, but I can fix that once I've done some formatting. And if I want to get 4 charts, I need to make it a bit smaller. If I zoom in, I can do some editing on the chart. So the top one looks okay. I don't like the size of the numbers on the vertical axis, so I'm going to go to the control panel sheet. I'm going to divide that number by 1000, add a decimal place and copy that down. And so back to the dashboard, this is a much better looking chart now. And aside from changing it to, let's say, a dark blue, I'm happy with that. The sleep one needs a bit of modifying because this vertical axis needs to start at 0 and possibly even adding a data label and removing the axis altogether. So that looks okay. A bit too many grid lines on the sleep chart, but that's fine.
The dashboard's now taking shape. We haven't spent a lot of time formatting these charts correctly. There still isn't adequate titles or axes and things like that sorted out, but that'll be one of the final steps. What I want to do next is add a third chart to this right hand side. That third chart's going to be a frequency counter. So if I go to my control panel sheet, I've started to set that up. I want to be able to count the number of days where there has been less than 10,000 steps and the number of days between 10 and 15 and so on and so on. And so what I'm going to do is simply write a formula. Now that formula is going to be a count ifs formula. First one's easy, it's just a single criteria. We need to look in the Fitbit table, looking in particular at the steps column, and count everything which is less than 10,000. And there's 6 days out of 13 months of data which is less than 10,000. Next one has 2 criteria. It is a count ifs function, and pretty much the same process really. We're looking at the steps field to make sure it is greater than or equal to 10,000 and that it is also less than 15,000. And so this process continues on. What I'm going to do is drag this down and just do some editing. And so I can edit this one to say 15 and this one to say 20. That's quite easy, and that's my biggest category. I've had 249 days in that 15 to 20 range. Our last one is a single criteria, so I'm going to take the S away, take away the second criteria, and have it tell me the number of days greater than or equal to 30,000. And there's 4 days. So I can now directly chart this grid. Place it on my dashboard. I'll do a bit of tidying up before I move it into place. And drag that across, and I can size that up and muck around with that a little bit further later. I want to add one more chart to this dashboard. Again, it's not a super informative one, but it's good to illustrate that having a lot of information of different kinds on a dashboard can be useful. I want to be able to say, based upon season, when am I the most active? And so to do that, I need to go to the data table. I'm just going to hide some columns so it's a little bit easier to put my season in here, and I'm simply going to create a field called season because this is a very easy way to do it. Now, on the side of the world that I live on, summer goes through until the end of February, at which time it turns to autumn, and then winter for 3 months, followed by spring, and then summer again. I now have the ability to extract out a simple summary table with average steps as my variable. And so a pretty standard analysis formula will again provide that information for me. And so that's going to be average if, what criteria am I looking at? In my Fitbit table, I now have a field called season, and if I click on this cell, then I can just double click and copy down. Once I know that, the field that I want to average is steps, and as I did previously, it probably makes sense to divide by 1,000 and use a number format to copy that down. So we've got our data table. We can insert a chart and get it over onto our dashboard. Now, some people are a big fan of keeping a dashboard themed. That means having the color palette be very set and stable and not too much going on. Other people like to be a bit flashy, so I'm going to go a little bit over the top here and just color things based upon a color for the season. And I'm not going to let myself be worried by whether that's the ideal thing to do or not. So we'll still do some formatting on the titles and axes labels and things like that a bit later on, but for now let's just keep pushing on and trying to fill in some of the remaining parts of this dashboard. Now, what we saw on the initial snapshot of the system was some key facts, and so by key facts I mean we had the highest day, we had the number of weeks above 130,000 steps, we had the number of nights above 6 hours sleep, and the average steps of the last 50 days. And each one of those had a little graphic with it as well, just to dress it up. So what I want to do firstly is just create that statistic, and then we can worry about how to pull it into the table later on. The first thing that I want to calculate is the maximum number of steps taken in a day, and I might go further than that and put the day in there as well. So let's firstly find out what the max is. We can use the max function. We can simply refer to the field in the table that we're talking about. We can see that that's 37,221. I think I did a half marathon on that day. Now, to find the date, it's simply just a matter of using index and match. what I'm trying to find is a date, and I'm using the match function to find it. And it tells me that it was on the 28th of the 11th, 2015. Now, if I was somewhat concerned that there might be 2 days with that date, I could find that out like so. And that just tells me that there's only 1 day, so I can rest easy that I've got the date that I wanted to. And now what I need to do is create in a cell the label that I'm going to put into that box. And so this is how I'm going to do it. So if I hit enter now, what we'll see is what's going to appear in our box. And what I'm also going to do is add that date. I'm going to put it inside brackets, and so we're getting there. We're not quite there yet. Put a couple of blanks in there and put a closing bracket, and I reckon we might be good to go. So if I put that inside my text box, I think that'll look okay. So let's go to the dashboard and set that first one up simply by inserting a shape, clicking inside the formula bar, typing equals, coming back and selecting our cell. And so here we are, we've got that. And I can simply line it up like so. And if that suddenly changed, for example, if I unhid these columns and I suddenly had 45,000, then we can see on our dashboard that that's just updated for us. So we don't have to have concerns about that being dynamic. It's linked to a cell. That cell has a formula in it which is directly calculating every time we add new data. So undo that, it should go back and leave us back to 37,221. So the next one I want to calculate is the number of weeks above 130,000. So that's just an arbitrary number that I've decided is my weekly target. And so if you recall, in the control panel we created a weekly summary, and so I can do a calculation from that. This table is called the date table. And so a countif will work for me just fine. This time I'm in the dates table. I'm using the total steps field. And I get 17. Now I need to have my label. And we're good to go. And so back to my dashboard, I can copy this, paste it underneath. We'll realign this later, and instead of aligning it to 34, I align it to 39. So change that to 39, pump the font back up so that it looks good, and we're done. So let's do 2 more of those. We want to find the percentage of days where sleep is more than 6 hours. Now this is my worst statistic, the one that I'm certainly not proud of, but all for a good cause. So we've got a column called hours of sleep. so I can leverage off that. So back to my control panel sheet. I can do a count. Just like previously, it's just a count if. It's in the Fitbit table. It's hours of sleep. Let's make it greater than or equal to 6. And now because I wanted to do a percentage, I need to do an overall count. I can simply point my count function to the entire field that we're interested in. That comes out at 396, and I can simply do my mathematics and come up with a percentage. And so our label needs to look like this. When I used the text function up above to put the date in the same cell as the highest day text, I needed to specify the format that I wanted it in. I have to do the same thing here. If I want to show this is a percentage. So this is my value. The format that I want to show it in is this. When I hit enter, we can see that it shows up as a single decimal place percentage score. So once again, I can go back to my dashboard and I can simply realign that to cell I46 and pump that up. The last one that I want to have is the average of the last 50 days. You could have any number of days, but I'm going to choose 50. So let's go back to the control panel sheet. So we know that there is 396 rows of data in the table. So we can leverage off that. Now in these two cells, what I'm going to do is, the last row is easy because that's the last cell in the data set, which we've done already. Next one is relatively intuitive. It is to subtract 50. And so we can now set up our index function. We can use the average, and inside the brackets I need to put the start and the end of the range, like so. The start of the range is here, and the end of the range is here. Close the brackets off, hit enter, and we can see that this is the average of the last 20 days. Calculate our label. Let's just point to this, put an equal sign in, and then calculate that. We can see that once again it's pulled in all the decimal places, so I don't particularly want that. I'm going to use once again my text function, and my format's just going to be a 0, which means 0 decimal places. And so if I go back to the dashboard, I can copy and paste this label, refocus that text formula, and pump it up a bit. And so things are looking okay. I need to paste in a little bit more flashy graphics just to match it to the example that we set up in the first place, but you might not feel that that's necessary. You might want to have a few more interesting features like these boxes in place, or some other graphics such as whether you're trending upwards or downwards. I have pasted those graphics in, and I'm just going to group everything together so that It's almost like an individual dashboard part that can be moved around. There's one more thing that I want to do, and that is to put in some conditional formatting inside a little summary table. And now for this simple grid, I just want to use some analysis formulas to pull in an indication of overall the last 6 weeks, last week and this week, whether we've met our target or not. So the target of 130 and 45. Now I need to put different formula in for this because there's no way that my average week is 130. So let's have a look at that. I need to use the average if function. I need to look in the date table, total steps, and I just want to put greater than 0 because what that will do is discount all of the rows that don't have any data in them just in case there's a problem. And so we can see that we've got a total of 119, which isn't at my target of 130. So I might conditionally format that a certain way to show that overall I'm just below my target. Now for my last 6 weeks I might do that slightly differently. So if I go to the control panel sheet, I can do a count just like on my other sheet to see that there's 57. And if I call that week counter, then I can leverage off that and it makes my formula a little bit easier to understand. So if I look at the last 6 weeks, I do just like I did last time. Average, enter on that one, I see I'm getting a bit better. So I've got my target quite comfortably. 141 is the average week for the last 6. Now the last week really can leverage off that same counter that I used. I only have to use an index this time rather than an analysis formula. I just have to extract out the correct row. So I'm looking at the date table, the field is total steps, and the row that I'm looking for is indicated by -1. Again, divide by 1000 and reduce it down to no decimal places. If I copy that down, I should just be able to take away the 1 and have last week. So we've got 4 different values being returned here, and we can conditionally format them in different ways depending on where they sit relative to this target. So why don't we try that now? New rule, format cells based upon their values using a 2-color scale. So let's say that based upon a number, I'm going to refer to 130 and I'm going to subtract 25 from that. And that's my bottom end of the threshold. My top end is this number plus 25. And this shows up as green. And so there we have it. We've got a relatively unimpressive looking set of colours. What I could have also done is use an icon set. So why don't I try this one? Need to manage that setup and make sure that it's giving us what we need. So just like before, we need to set up some rules. So my rules are going to be a bit simpler. Let's say -15 gets you orange, and below that gets you red. So anyway, we've got that set up, and we can transfer that across to sleep if we wish to. Simply going to scoop that out, paste it into sleep, edit it back to the field, take that away, and we've got what my average sleep is. Similarly, the last 6 weeks, if I take away the 1000 when I copy, that might make it a little bit quicker. Seems that I'm consistently sitting around 44. And so there we are there. Let's conditionally format these cells as well using the same icon set. Anything above 45, orange anything above 40, apply that. And so at least I've got one green light there for last week, otherwise not looking so good. Format that a little bit better. One thing I always like to do is on the view tab take away the grid lines, and if I get the right perspective on my screen, it's not looking too bad. I'm going to just take a moment to reformat the axes and the chart titles, but otherwise hopefully you have got a little bit of an insight into how you might be able to build a dashboard from a bunch of workings, be it from pivot tables or from formulas or from a set of summary statistics that you've calculated. But certainly this is something that you can whip together in about an hour's time if you have got all the information on hand. So I've gone ahead and formatted and tidied up most of these charts. There's a couple of things left to go that I wanted to draw your attention to. Sometimes it's not always easy to read double axis charts, and to make that a little bit simpler, what I often do is I make the font the same color as the series. So in this case it would be making the axis title and the axis label the same color as the series. So in this case red. Red is a particularly poor example because it's a little bit hard to read on a lot of backgrounds, but nevertheless I just wanted to illustrate that point. Now also on this particular axis up the top here, I could change it to a blue color just to make it perfectly clear that when you're looking at the blue line, you're looking at the blue axis label. Not something I've seen too much of, but I've used it with a few of my dashboards in the past, and it has, I think, helped the user. So let's just check that everything looks okay. I can interact with my timeline, and that's all working okay. The charts update and show more or less data. Now one thing that could be worth doing is to check out what it looks like to add some new data to this. So I'm now on my Fitbit website where I can log in and create an export of data for myself. So I'm going to have a go at that. I'm going to use a custom date range, which is going to be the 1st of February until, let's say, yesterday, and I'm going to export out body, activities, sleep into a CSV format. And as I open that exported CSV format, I can see that I've got some quite useful info that I can paste directly in. So I'm going to grab these dates. I'm going to go to the bottom of my data set, and I'm going to paste values. And what we can see is that because we pre-populated our weeks, they're already filling in for us. I'm going to take body weight, paste values in, and similarly the other columns. Now by pasting them in, I can go to the dashboard and I can see if anything has changed. So what I can see for a start is that this week is incomplete. I've only done 57,000 steps in a couple of days and only had a small amount of sleep there. And so that will pad out as I add the extra data, but I can see that things have adjusted. So adding new data, everything's working great. I could perpetually be adding more and more information to this for as long as I like and get this dashboard providing up-to-date and thorough information to me. So a dashboard is what I consider a project. It's something that requires a bit of back-end work. You set it up to look nice in case someone else might use it. You set it up to try and allow yourself the ability to add new data, whether it be daily, weekly, monthly or annually, and you can play around with things such as controls and look at a different set of analysis as to what you might find in the software that comes on your phone or on the website.